All right, we're gonna go over, I know you guys already kind of know this, but the difference between glaze and underglaze. Your glazes, these are just a few I happen to have at home, are these guys right here. And for the most part, they have the actual swatch of what they look like on the bottle. But you could see that they look very different. So in the container, this one kind of looks like a gray color, but it's turquoise. This one looks almost white, but it's blue. So I'm gonna switch those two as well. All right, you're fine, you're good. So glazes really change quite a bit in the kiln. Underglazes change a little bit in color, but not as much. I'm just scooching this over because my camera's bad. Okay. Underglazes are a little different, as in they could go directly onto your bone dry piece of clay, leather hard piece of clay, or a bisqued piece. In your little kits, I gave you guys two different blues. One of them should have an M on it, and the other one should have an E on it. I think that's backwards. So one stands...
Wait, what was in the giant figure then? It's like a really dark blue?
That is black underglaze for our next project.
Okay.
All right, so these are the two that we're gonna be using on the porcelain. One says E, one says M, just so you can kind of keep them separate. I will show you what they look like, and I posted them directly on our page, so you don't need to go looking for them. Please don't kick me out. Okay, good. This is the first thing on the main page. I posted electric blue, which the E stands for. Once I go ahead, I'm gonna dip it in clear glaze, just like I showed you guys dipping glaze at the college. So you're responsible for all your little designs, then I'm gonna give it a nice shiny finish. The electric blue is going to look like this when it's fired. And the medium blue is going to look like this when it's fired. So those are the two different underglazes I gave you. You could tell that one's a little bit lighter in the two, but not so much as when they're fired. So I'm gonna click out of that, but you kind of tell if you look really closely. Also, the electric blue is a little bit more watery than the medium blue, but because they are both blue underglazes, sometimes it's hard to separate them. What I would recommend, rather than just working directly out of these little cups, is kind of making yourself a little palette. I just ripped this piece of cardboard off something, so you could use cardboard or wax paper, kind of whatever you have laying around, because we're not going to keep these. And I just like to put a little bit of underglaze down at a time, so that I'm not keep dipping my brush in here, because one, you may dip it like a little too deep and then have like a little bit of a mess. I know that's kind of common. I do that sometimes. And then sometimes you might want to water them down, especially this medium blue. Sometimes, depending on the batch, some of them are a little bit thicker than others. So you could see this one's quite thick compared to the electric blue. If you want to go ahead on your little palette, and you could see now one's lighter and one's darker, but if you want to, you could just go in and label them so you know what's what. And the reason I'm having you guys put it on something else is so that you still have everything in your container and it won't like dry out on you or anything, so make sure you cover those ahead of time. The underglazes are usually like this. They don't necessarily have the color on them because they will be a different color depending on the temperature you heat them to. So they could be a low fire or a high fire. So the color I showed you guys, that's listed right in Google Classroom, that's what it's gonna be. Make sure you have a little bowl of water near you. Number one, for cleaning brushes. Number two, if you want to add a little bit of water, you can do that. Now remember, these are so fragile, super fragile. And you will also notice that they may be a little powdery, even though we did burnish them. keeping that in mind, with glaze and underglaze, you usually want to do 2 to 3 coats. I think 1 to 2 should be fine on here because it's such small details. On this larger part, I'll hold it up here. I have like this flower in the center, then a bunch of smaller pieces coming along the side. I think these little pieces on the side, just 1 coat will be fine. Where the larger sections, I'm gonna wanna use at least 2 coats of the underglaze. What's gonna happen is it's gonna be pretty transparent after it's fired, so you do wanna make sure you get a pretty good coat on there to make sure you don't have those brush marks. And I would try to think of, as you're doing your pattern, like I said, you could use all 1 color, but, also think about every other color or how you want to incorporate them into your design. I gave you guys 2 brushes. I really did just pick at random. One should be like slightly bigger than the other, so like a detailed brush and then like a little bit bigger of a detailed brush. If for whatever reason you need a smaller brush, I think I gave everyone one, but I could drop some off up front, but I tried my best. With the medium blue, I'm gonna treat it almost like I would a watercolor and just add some water into it, but not really pull it off to the side, just adding water to make it more movable. So let me scooch this over so you guys could see. Just because it's kind of thick, and now this is much more movable than if I was working, with this thick paint. You could see it gets on the brush and it's pretty gloopy. Where this thinned out paint is gonna be so much more fluid and easy to work with. Take your time and also make sure you have either, like I said, a shirt or a towel to rest your project on. Super, super, super important. Make sure you're always supporting it because you don't want to have any accidents. Want to always keep it supported. I have it kind of like almost like wrapped up right now. I'm gonna go in first with the electric blue underglaze, and this one you probably won't need to add any water to. And I always like to consider my shapes on these vases as outlining them first and then filling it in. So I'm gonna go in and I'm going to make this triangle. And my hands always shake when I'm doing such fine detail, oh my goodness. And try with the top to make it as even as you can. I know sometimes it's hard, sometimes people will put like a ring around it, which is fine, but try to make it as neat as you can. I'm gonna then just fill this in with the blue underglaze. Now you could connect them at the top, but for something this size, I think you would be okay with like one really pretty good coat of underglaze, not a thin one. You don't want to see the clay through it, but you could go over again and do a second one if you want to. So going through, wrong paint. And then just making sure that you really work it up to the top. You could connect it to whatever shapes and patterns you have. So that would be the basics of painting like your shapes in, just trying to get a really good outline. You'll notice that it will dry a little bit lighter, however it will fire to whatever color I showed you in those little swatches. So the next thing would be shading. A lot of you guys had different flowers, things like that, so I tried to replicate something kind of similar to that. And I'm gonna use my dark and my light glazes, underglazes, to go ahead and do some shading. I'm going to start at the very bottom, and that's where my little leaves would overlap the center part. You could see that. And I'm just gonna slowly start doing some brush strokes going upward. And then going to go in the opposite direction and add in some of this medium blue. And I kind of have like this more organic shaped flower that I was working with. And feel free, you know, if you make like a little mistake, feel free to, you could really like go over it if you want to. You can cover it up like there. I didn't make my line perfect, so I just made that a little bit bigger. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in and work with both of these underglazes simultaneously to really blend them going upward. And you could see in the little PowerPoint I uploaded way long ago with all the examples. Some of my students in there, they're shading on their floral pieces. But feel free to be like pretty expressive with it, with getting your petals in here. This document camera I have right here is awful. After that, I like to go in and I like to do my darker color for the center. So I'm gonna go in with my electric blue and give that a nice overlap so that we can tell that's what's behind it. I like to do my second one afterwards with a darker color so you could really get that overlap. Now it is a little bit harder than shading with an acrylic just because they're very similar in color, and when they dry they're fairly similar, but just kind of keep in mind what color you were working with. And I'm gonna go in and I'm just gonna incorporate some lines again. And just kind of follow like the process as you go. So that's kind of where I'm at now. You could definitely see it better on this video that I'm doing. Make sure you keep your hand still, and also make sure with the piece that where you want to paint, you're kind of turning your vase and making it the most convenient for you to work that way. You want to make sure you really rest this nicely. But I want to start working over here. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start filling in this area. And if you guys have any questions on shading or anything like that, I could absolutely help you. I would always start with the lighter color towards the top, leave a little bit on the top area just so you could see as it's getting lighter, and then do like a nice outline. Some of you guys had more solid shapes, and that is fine as well, but I want you to really challenge yourself with these. You have, what's today, Thursday? You have about a week to work on painting these, so I'd like to see them right before break so you guys can leave and you know, enjoy, relax, rest during your break. I'm going to continue with that flower. I would go in a few times, make sure I really build up the thickness. Now I started to incorporate on the side these different little vines coming out with these little floral pieces, and I don't know if you could see that. And like I said, all the pencil will burn away in the kiln. If you drew something on there and then you start painting and you don't like it, you don't have to worry about it. You could just be like, all right, I don't want to paint that section. I'm just gonna leave the pencil, let it be. You don't need to erase it, it will burn out. So I'm gonna go in and get these really fine lines. And make sure that when you start to run out of paint, that you backtrack and continue your line from about a third of the way. And I always like to have my lines going away from my floral pieces, because then you get that nice thin area where it meets up. I really want you guys to look at your sketches when we first started these. Decide if you still like your design. If you don't like your design and you want to run a new one by me, that's fine too. But I think we want to stick really with the traditional Chinese blue on white designs, you know, patterns at the top and the bottom, floral designs, dragons. We talked about different fish forms. I'm trying to think what other animals. Birds were really popular to be on these traditional pieces. So these little itty bitty guys right here that I'm filling in, I'm almost just making like pretty thick dots. And even if you know, mistake a color here or there, you could kind of just go in and touch things up. But that's why I think it's so much easier to have it on a palette like this. Not only are you able to save your materials better, but then you have something to work off of that's a little bit more exact than just, you know, dipping in your cups of glaze. I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna use this again to swirl out. And then I have a little circle here. And I'm gonna actually go in again, like I said, and outline all the shapes. And then I'm gonna fill the circle in. And you kind of almost do that by like almost dabbing the underglaze in. And it dries pretty quickly. If you have any thin spots, you could always go in and do a second coat. So what I'm gonna recommend is, you know, for little areas like this, you probably would need 1 to 2 coats. For something large like this, you're gonna wanna get at least 2 to 3 coats on that area. This is like the basics to underglaze. It's really fun to work with. Like I said, it's difficult sometimes to tell the colors, but you know, reference the online sheet I gave you. And right here, you could see I'm starting to paint in the darker blue. It's gonna change a little bit. And it's gonna look almost identical to the other one, but just being aware of what you're painting, you'll know that that's gonna come out darker than the petals that were behind it. And when you're shading something, always think that you wanna work from behind, coming forward. Because it's a lot easier to overlap than it is to then have to go back and fill around this little section here. So I'm gonna work on this for quite some time, and I'm gonna work on it in my class later on today. And even some of these shading lines that I brought in, I might go in and add some extra strokes just to kind of start building like that. Yeah, this is awful. This does not really show it correctly. But yeah. So what you guys will need, your underglazes, something to put them on. Like I said, like I ripped off some cardboard. You could take like a cardboard cereal box you're finished with and just use that as your palette. Have some type of little cup with water in it. Have your brushes. And very, very important, have a little bed for your vase. Because while we know we can fix it with vinegar, it's not ideal. If something happens, message me on Remind. I'll walk you through it. I did post the little video that I made the other day in our class as well. But be very careful. Treat it with care. This is your nice little porcelain vase. You guys worked really hard on them. And I think that's all I have for you guys today. Yeah, so go ahead and you guys can finish up drawing out your designs. Make sure that you have your underglazes. If you don't, make sure that you go ahead and pick them up at the school. It is open today, even though I'm at my house. So yeah, I hope you guys have a lot of fun with this, and I'd love to see tomorrow some of the progress that you guys are making. So if you started any of the sections, you know, once we're done with class today, I'd really like to see what you guys are working on, and if you need any help with, you know, the different shading and the different colors and everything like that. Does anyone have any